Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. I'm Austin Tichenor of the Reduced Shakespeare Company.
And I'm Gary Andrews, otherwise known as Gary Scribbler of, well, basically the internet, really. And my house.
Really?
Yeah.
And your house.
Yeah.
And today we are doing yet another episode of Drawing on Shakespeare. And we are joined today by a distinguished scholar, the Doctor and Professor Peter Holland, currently of the University of Notre Dame, and also the president of some international Shakespeare organization. Am I right? I can't begin to get your titles
right. That's right. It's called the International Shakespeare Association, and it's the only global organization for Shakespeare scholars. There are many national organizations. There's the Shakespeare Association of America. The oldest one is the German Shakespeare Society, the Deutsche Shakespeare Gesellschaft, which started in 1864, the 300th anniversary of Shakespeare's birth. And eventually there was even one in England, the British Shakespeare Association, about the most recent of the lot. But the ISA is the only international organization.
Fantastic. Well, and I was thinking about it this morning, and I didn't Google your titles, but I did sort of try to put our relationship into perspective, and I dare say that you're the closest person I have to a friend and Shakespearean mentor, and my guess is you occupy that space for many people. Is that fair to say?
Different kinds of ways. I mean, quite often, because of having spent many years in Cambridge as first an undergraduate and then faculty, I met a lot of people who went on to very distinguished careers in the theatre and in film. And very often, if they're doing something Shakespearean, they get in touch and we chat. I don't act as a kind of official dramaturg or anything. We just spend time talking about, does this make any conceivable sense if I do it like this? And so on. And then the nice thing is I usually end up writing a little note for their program. And I love doing that. It's a curious little art form where you have like 1,000 words to say something that isn't going to strike your colleagues as completely dumb.
Or bore your audience.
Well,
just
my colleagues
are
often in the audience, and I've got to please them as well as pleasing the people who've never heard of this play that they're going to see called Hamlet. What's it about? No.
I have a Hamlet anecdote which I love, seeing as it'll feed quite nicely into our theme this week, which is basically Shakespeare on film. Is I remember going to the cinema locally to me to see the Mel Gibson rendition of Hamlet. And I was sitting there watching the film, and it got to the fight at the end, and it all happened, and he went down, spoiler, and they behind me, these girls went, oh, he dies! And I just thought, how lovely must it be to be that person that doesn't know that Hamlet's going to die at the end?
I know. I mean, I often talk with my class, and this semester I'm as usual in the fall teaching a class that used to be called Shakespeare and Film, but is now renamed Shakespeare on the Big Screen. I'll explain that in a moment. But I say to them, you know, when did you learn the story of Romeo and Juliet? And unlike perhaps Hamlet, or particularly for those girls, Hamlet, people have no notion of when they first knew that Romeo and Juliet ended unhappily. And it's nothing to do with when did you read it in school. It's somehow one of those things you pick up from our culture.
But one thing I love about this that idea is that Shakespeare is part of our culture in ways we don't even understand. Even people who think, oh, I don't know any Shakespeare, they know more Shakespeare than they think they know.
Yes, and they don't know that they know it. So it's something that sort of appears. But in quite a few films, it becomes a kind of game as to what Shakespeare references are placed in for other people. This week happens to be the week where the film of the week is Romeo and Juliet, the wonderful animated version of Romeo as garden gnomes with a range of voices to die for. The great thing about recent animation is you can get anybody to turn up in studio to voice a character, ranging from, you know, James McAvoy and Emily Blunt to Ozzy Osbourne and Dolly Parton and Hulk Hogan, and picking up along the way Maggie Smith and Michael Caine. But dropped into this film, which is intended for kids and works very well with kids, there are all kinds of little Shakespeare jokes added in. So the lorry that nearly knocks and destroys Nomeo is called The Tempest in a Teapot. There's a removal van called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Removals, and another one called As You Like It Movers. And all of those kinds of gags are just left into the film. Nothing draws attention to them. As You Like It Movers is on screen for about a second and a half. If you're quick, you'll spot it. My favorite one is that there's a moment where Juliet's dad, cross with her, glues her to the pedestal, as he calls it, that she's on. And the glue is called The Taming of the Glue.
Oh,
this is about different audiences picking up different things along the way, and different degrees of Shakespeare literacy, if that's what we want to call it, will notice different ones of the gags. A bit like watching your shows, Austin.
Yes, there are Easter eggs for every audience member, and that's what's. I mean, it's wonderful about the first time we met, and I know I've told this story, and this story is my memory, so you can confirm whether it matches your memory or not. But we met on Clive Anderson's show, Notes and Queries, on Channel 4 of the BBC in the 90s. And Reed Martin, my RC partner, and I, Reed Martin, were doing a two-person version of Rap Othello, and we did it. And then you came on and you said something like, and I'm paraphrasing, well, I know I'm supposed to be brought on here to have a responsible opposing viewpoint, but I loved that.
Well, I'd seen your show in LA, so I knew what was coming.
And you are not a snob about Shakespeare at all.
No, there is only one kind of Shakespeare that I really detest, and that's boring Shakespeare, right? I've sat in the theatre watching, a great cast produce something that is so dull that I'm just sitting and snoring. Snoring to myself, I wouldn't annoy my neighbours. And there are one or two films, and I hesitate to name any, but I could be persuaded, which for me fall into that category. I mean, I have to admit that Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, which has some wonderful things in it, but it's 4 hours long. And I have occasionally watched it on DVD, and I've fallen asleep and I've woken up again, and it's not much further on. And I'm sorry, and I don't mean to be rude, because Branagh's work and his influence on Shakespeare on film is immense, but that one for me doesn't work. But
it's an interesting exercise in completion, isn't it? It was as an academic exercise. It was good to do, and it's great to have it there as a reference. But it's not one you'd sit and watch for fun.
So he made two versions of it. And this comes into the category of not many people know this. There was a 4-hour version, and then there was a 2.5-hour version. Oh. And the idea was that the 4-hour version might play in a select few movie theatres in very big cities. So it might kind of go to the Odeon Leicester Square or something like that in London. But the 2.5-hour one would be the one that got the general release. Yeah. But actually, nobody wanted it. They all wanted, the distributors found that all the theatres were booking the 4-hour version.
Huh.
That's intriguing.
Well, the thing I like best about that version is the sense of the politics and the scale, because you can do that on film. You can do scale, but it's like the first time I became aware of, oh, right, Claudius has political things he's got to worry about, and uniting the country and defending the country against Norway, and that landed for me in that film in a way that it's never landed for me before.
Because you suddenly have an expansive landscape, and you suddenly have an army invading. I mean, when Fortinbras turns up in the theatre at the end, if he's lucky, he's got 3 soldiers with him. Enter Fortinbras with his army. I don't think so. But on film, they're crashing through the windows of the palace, and you get the feeling that, of course, what's now happened is Denmark has no ruling family. Yeah. I mean, if Fortinbras doesn't take control, who else is left? Horatio? I mean, come on, there's nobody else left alive to take control. And so he walks in and says, it's mine. He has that wonderful line, I have some rights of memory in the kingdom. And you think, what rights of memory? That's spin.
Yeah.
And I recall a production, a theatre production, not a film production, in which he was doing that as a piece to camera to the journalist. Great, that nails it. That's how spin works.
No, that's
But
very good.
But there are these things that film can do that the theatre can't, and it has to do with that kind of reality.
Do you make a distinction now with the advent or the proliferation, I guess, of filmed stage productions? Do you make a distinction between those and productions that are actually made for the movies?
So that's why I changed the name of the course to Shakespeare on the Big Screen. I'm very lucky. We have a cinema on campus, and I teach the course in the campus cinema. So everything we're going to watch is up on the big screen.
Ah, very good.
In other words, we're watching films as they were designed to be seen. And one of the things that's changed so hugely in our culture is the comparative infrequency with which young people go to movie theatres. They may go and catch a new blockbuster, but where I grew up going to the movies every Saturday afternoon with my best friend, you know, when we were about 11, 12, 13, we'd go off and see whatever was the latest movie we could get into.
And they'd stay in to watch it when it came round again the second time.
Absolutely, you could do things like that.
Yeah.
They don't do that anymore. So they are rediscovering in my course what it feels like to watch it on the right scale in the company of friends.
Yeah.
So we screen it together, and I sit together to watch it from DVD, but that's fine. And so I can include things like film theatre. So because those kinds of work, National Theatre Live, the Royal Shakespeare Company, Stratford, Ontario, Globe, they're distributed to movie theatres, right? The NT Live goes out at your local cinema. And they don't go to DVD, the NT Live ones. So that's the only place you can see it. So I'm entitled to use them. And the only thing I exclude is watching at full length something made for TV. I'll show them a clip from TV, but something made for TV. And I think of the brilliant Macbeth. Can I say Macbeth? Macbeth. The brilliant Macbeth starring Ian McKellen and Judi Dench, a film version of a theatre production by the RSC. That was made for TV. And I have to say, when you look at it on a big screen, it just looks wrong. The scale is wrong because it was designed for something the size of what TV screens were, which isn't what they are. I mean, now they've got so damn huge, you know, you need to build the house around the TV screen. But you think about it, you remember growing up, I mean, TVs, oh, if you were very lucky, you had a television that might be as big as a 20-inch TV. You can't even buy a 20-inch TV anymore. There's nothing that small.
But it's like a computer that is so small, it only takes up one room.
Yes, exactly. But you can see what I'm pushing at, that as it were, what we've got in that thing we call Shakespeare on screen is many different kinds of screens. And each kind of screen involves a different relationship with its audience. When you watch something on the telly, perhaps with one or two other members of your family, it's not the same as watching perhaps the same movie in a movie theater with 100 people you don't know.
Yeah, that communal experience is really important.
And that's, of course, what we always have in theater.
Right.
We hope there are 100 people there. On a bad night, there may be 3. But the idea is we go into a space with a bunch of strangers to undergo the same experience in front of us.
Well, and I remember I did not see the Mark Rylance all-male 12th night in live on stage with another one of your former students, Stephen Fry.
Stephen Fry.
But I saw it via the DVD or via the online thing, and I loved it so much, and I thought I'm enjoying this more on screen than I might have sitting at the back of the Globe or standing there for 3 hours. The close-ups and I thought it was very well shot, but I love the close-ups. I like seeing that.
The very first Royal Shakespeare Company live broadcast was Richard II, the one starring David Tennant, directed by Greg Doran, who course, is the artistic director of the RSC. And there are two moments in it I just want to mention. One is the very first shot. And it's a shot of a woman slumped over a coffin.
Right.
It's actually Jane Lapotaire as the Duchess of Gloucester over the coffin of her murdered husband. But the shot is from directly above her, as if you're in the flies of the theatre looking straight down on the stage. So the very first thing that the RSC did was to show you something that you could never have seen in the theatre, no matter where you sat. And I took that as a kind of gag. Look, we know that you could never buy this seat. That's why we can show you this at the beginning. And there was another moment in that production when Richard embraced O'Merle. And it was up on a gallery, a movable gallery in the theatre. They did it as a close-up for the TV version. And what Greg Doran says on the commentary, sometimes directors' commentaries are really interesting. Sometimes they're very boring. Greg is always very interesting. He said, what I wanted, the reason I wanted that shot is that's where the audience wants to be. When we sit and watch that moment, we want to be close to it, looking at it closely. But we can't because of where it is in the theatre. So I'm giving the audience at that moment the shot they'd like to see. So we're discovering all kinds of ways in which filming theatre allows the audience's desire, our yearning, to be fulfilled, and sometimes not to be fulfilled. Sometimes film theatre can miss the thing you most want to look at.
I think particularly the RSC ones, I think are mostly filmed very well. I think when I sit and watch those, I've always thought they're really good records. They've chosen, coming down here, going to do my thing. They've chosen the shot. Unlike my shot I've chosen here to talk when I'm supposed to be drawing. I'm gonna switch cameras. Hang on. They choose the camera and the shot really well in those. And some other institutions who have been filming their stuff, I think, stay too wide too often. They're thinking we need to show the whole theatre show. And I think the tightness is what really sells. Like you say, they've chosen what you want to see, and I think they do that really well with the RSC ones, because you're not going to the theatre; you are watching a recording. So the director needs to make choices, and I think they've missed that on some of the other ones I've watched, where I've actually productions I know that I would have loved in the theatre. I've kind of got a bit bored watching on the videos. Yeah, I haven't had that with any of the RSC ones, you know.
But they do an immensely complex process of preparation. Yeah. And that's what makes the difference. So the screen director watches the live performance, begins to do a storyboard, works out a series of shots from the script that they're using. They then do that as a kind of dress rehearsal version. And they look at that and they say, no, this camera position is wrong. No, I need to go to that camera and so on. So there isn't a matter of kind of, I don't know which camera to choose at this moment, in the moment. It's all actually set up in advance. And when they've done that a couple of times, then they film it with a live audience. So they know what's coming and they know what they're looking for. And they can get that moment.
The two times that I've seen it miss filmed theater is when they go too close on one person and the joke in a comedy is over here at that other character's reaction, or we just started to watch the Pushkin Measure for Measure in Russian that was done at the National Theatre, I think filmed by the National Theatre, and similarly they closed in on characters who in a stage production, because of the nature of the staging, they use the ensemble to change the scenery. And they're focusing on this one character, and then you see that character stand up and walk off stage blocked by people. And that's not the effect an audience would have in the theater. In the theater, you would just see that character go away in this blur of bodies, and that also misses the theatrical point.
So we think this kind of thing is brand new. It isn't, of course. There's a silent film version of some scenes from Richard III, which was filmed using the sets then for the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre in Stratford with the Frank Benson Company starring, guess who, Frank Benson. And there it is. We've got a record of what that stage show looks like. And the one that is really interesting, because it's one of those pure accidents that it ever survived. In 1964, Richard Burton played Hamlet on Broadway, and directed by John Gielgud. Was apparently not a pleasant experience for some of the cast. Gielgud would say, "Not like that, dear boy, like this," and then do it himself, which is not really the best way to direct. But they set up a way of filming it. They filmed a small group of performances and then edited it, and then distributed it to movie theaters. And it was called, a new system, it was called, wait for it, TheatroFilm. This was the only thing I think ever shot in TheatroFilm. And the idea was that at the end of the screenings, all copies were destroyed. All copies were destroyed except one that was given to Burton. And that's the one that survived, and they could restore it from that celluloid.
And that's the one I've got on VHS.
Exactly. And I've now got it on VHS. I also have it on DVD. And it's fascinating. Yeah. Because they really don't quite know how to film it, but they're going to make a damn good try.
Yeah. And it's a pretty successful good try.
It's not bad. But, yeah, what I'm getting at is these new ways that we discover. What's new is the liveness.
Yeah.
When the National Theatre actually shows you the thing at the same time as it's happening in the theatre on the South Bank.
That's exciting, isn't it? When they do that, and that is, and you feel very different when you go to the cinema and watch that, knowing it's happening.
Exactly.
When you go,
I always find myself looking in the audience to see if I know anybody. You know, never have seen anybody.
I've seen someone I know in the audience at the Globe when I've been watching it on TV. I was like, oh, but
and you wave. Oh,
yeah, they can't see me. It's interesting, actually, going on to the movies, the ones that have been made as movies as well. How sometimes early on in the movies, weirdly, they were still quite stuck to almost theatrical technique in movies that weren't as cinematic, and how that change has come across over the years has been a fascinating journey.
But also because the early sound ones, particularly the great films of the 1930s, the Warner Brothers' Midsummer Night's Dream with James Cagney giving us his bottom, and Olivier de Havilland introducing Olivier de Havilland, and Mickey Rooney as part. I mean, an amazing movie, and a Romeo and Juliet, directed by George Cukor, with Leslie Howard and Norma Shearer. Leslie Howard was 43 and Norma Shearer was 34, and there they are playing supposedly teenagers, and no. But what you've got is the full-scale Hollywood Studios treatment.
One of the Barrymores or something as Mercutio in that one as well.
John Barrymore as a very, very drunk Mercutio, played by a very, very drunk John Barrymore. Yes. I mean, that's, this is typecasting. But what I love about those films is that the scale is colossal. Everything is huge. There's a wonderful little making of featurette about the Midsummer Night's Dream. And it's called A Dream Come True, and the voiceover is saying that the people creating the set scoured the redwood forest and chopped down these trees to bring them to the soundstage to create the forest. And all I can do is sit there and think, no, you didn't chop down a redwood to put it on screen. Come on. But you could do that kind of thing in the mid-30s. Nobody said, what are you doing? You're not being ecologically sound. The scale is simply beyond colossal. And
Olivier made a feature out of the bug in his Hamlet, right? Because it starts in the theater, it starts on stage, and then it blows open the doors.
Henry V.
Excuse me. Yeah.
And it starts on the stage of the Globe.
Yeah.
Actually, it's an extraordinary film, isn't it, that one? The way it becomes more and more cinematic up to Agincourt and then works its way back again. And I think
back into the theatre.
Incredible, the three stages.
Completely brilliant. I remember Olivier being interviewed on television once about it, and he was talking about it, and they said to him, why didn't you just kind of do it in front of a medieval castle? There are an awful lot of them in England. It's quite easy to film, even in the middle of wartime, And he said, but that's too real. So the only thing that is really real in it, as it were, is the field of Agincourt. And that's the Irish landscape. He went to Ireland to film that because he could get the horses he needed for that astonishing sequence of the French cavalry charge. Everybody remembers the charge of the French knights.
It's
I remember
still
as a
hard
kid
one to top. That is such a
anyway.
beautifully shot scene as well.
Blown up.
It's extraordinary.
So here's the thing that most intrigues me about that film. It begins, yes, it begins in the Globe, but it starts with a kind of panorama of London, a big model, and then it moves around the model before it finally gets in, and we watch the audience assembling and so on. And it's 8 minutes into the film before the first line of dialogue, the chorus's opening line, is spoken. There's chatter going on in the theatre, but you can't quite hear it except for somebody going, "Oranges, who wants an orange?" You know, things like that. But that's just background noise. And he's willing to take that long before, as it were, the play starts. That's daring. That's real confidence in filmmaking. I love things like that.
Do you have any favorite film versions? And do you find that your students have interesting favorite film versions?
I usually ask them at the end of the semester which has been their favorite, and I'm often very surprised that they actually often do come away saying Akira Kurosawa's version of Macbeth, Throne of Blood, or its real title, Castle of the Spider's Web. That's what the Japanese title actually means. Very often they say that's the film that just blew us away as film. Just a piece of filmmaking of such brilliance. And they get it, and they're right. I have quirky favorites. One that virtually nobody has ever got round to seeing, a version of King Lear made by Jean-Luc Godard, that he was going to make for Go-Glo, Menachem Globus. Apparently the contract was signed for it on a napkin at the Cannes Film Festival. And he cast Norman Mailer as King Lear. And Mailer did 1 day of filming and walked off. So he recast it with Burgess Meredith. But he incorporated some of the footage of Mailer. And it's all metafilmic. It's all about making this film. There's an intertitle of words come up saying, King Lear, a film shot in the back. And there is a tiny sequence of Woody Allen as the fool. Not a line of dialogue. I don't know what it's doing. It's full of little kind of bits that eventually cohere. And the theatre director, Peter Sellers, playing a character called William Shakespeare Jr. V, who is trying to reassemble the fragments of his ancestors' plays. Wow. If you can ever get a chance of watching this, it took me about 3 watches, 3 viewings before I began to really like it. And now I just think it's amazing. I've tried showing it in class. The kids just, they're asleep in 10 minutes. It just does not work for them. You have to be really obsessed by film to find Godard at his most Godardian, what you really want to watch. And I'm afraid the current generation, no, it's not for them.
That's an interesting question. Do you feel like you are more obsessed by film than theater, or sort of equally?
I am more obsessed by film now. And partly because, of course, what we were talking about before, the filming of theatre means that film now embraces theatre in a way it didn't. So here was my problem. I moved to the University of Notre Dame, wonderful place, and I'm delighted to be here, in 2002, but it means I'm no longer in the UK and I can't see theatre in the way I used to see it.
Yeah.
When I was in Stratford, at the Shakespeare Institute, I could watch the same production 10 times in a summer.
Yeah.
Now I have that ever-increasing list of productions I missed because they opened and closed before I got back to the UK.
Yeah.
So I've found myself inevitably moving more towards being interested in what film does. And I'm just fascinated by, if you like, the filmness of film. What happens when film does things that theatre can't? And it's everything from the opening fight in Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, where there's a sense of real danger, and there's women running around clutching babies trying to get away from this feuding bunch of rival servants. And it has something that film realism can produce, And frankly, it never does that on stage. I've never seen it have real edginess on stage. But you can do that on film. Or thinking of another marvelous film version, again, of Romeo, Baz Luhrmann's, William Shakespeare's Romeo.
You're about to mention the same one, yeah.
Filmic from first shot of a tiny TV screen somewhere a million miles from the camera through to the very last shot. And every moment he knows what is happening that a film does that only film can do. And it's
he wasn't nominated. He wasn't nominated for Best Direction. He was nominated for Most Direction.
Most Direction. And there's one heck of a lot of direction. But I vividly remember the first time I saw it. Saw it before it had opened in the UK. I came over to the States for something, and I was in Washington, DC, and I checked listings, and it was still on in one movie theater. So I go to the kind of 2 o'clock screening, and there are perhaps as many as 5 of us in the audience. You know, it's reached that stage. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to hate this, I'm going to hate this. And the moment when the news anchor who's speaking the prologue comes, you know, that TV screen gets closer and closer until you more or less dive into the screen. And I was completely and utterly hooked. And every time I watch it now, it's that same exhilarating feeling.
People are so down on that film these days, and I don't know why, because I thought it was great. And I think I really liked about that I thought it achieved, which shows you what film can do that stage can't sometimes, is the modernization they did, which people do on stage. They put it in modern dress, but they didn't need to mess around. Like when people in a modern dress on the theatre, when they say, pass me my sword, and it's a gun, or they have to say, it's a knife, or my gun. And in that, when he said, pass me my put up your sword, crash zoom to the brand name of the gun, saying sword 9mm.
Exactly.
And you just
isn't that just brilliant? And it's faithful. Now, do you go to that movie for great verse speaking? No. Is that the only thing you want?
Except for Pete Postlethwaite.
Pete Postlethwaite, yes. But then he could do no wrong. Much lamented. And then I watch something like, I mentioned that 1930s one with Leslie Howard and Norma Shearer, and they know they are speaking verse. And so they're sort of kind of singing it in a strange lyrical way. And that for me is just as bad as verse speaking as anything that Leonardo DiCaprio comes up with in that movie. And good verse speaking has its own reality, and it's very rare in the theatre now, and it's very rare on film ever.
It has something to do with honesty and meaning what you say, rather than sticking to what people think it needs to be pronounced like this, I think.
And also just feeling rhythm.
Yeah.
You know, every Shakespeare line, verse or prose, has its own rhythm. Yeah. And if you don't feel that musical rhythm that the meter is giving you, then you miss how those words are put together. And great verse speaking. There is one example I have often gone back to. There was a film version of Midsummer Night's Dream directed by Peter Hall. It was an offshoot of a Royal Shakespeare Company production in around 1960.
I saw this for the first time about 6 months ago. I've been waiting to watch it for ages.
Judi Dench in it, wearing nothing but a long wig, and Ian Richardson as Titania and Oberon. Diana Rigg, a very young Diana Rigg as Helena in leather boots. But the quality of verse speaking at that point in the Royal Shakespeare Company's history is amazing. And I am...
A lot more than we said with the filmmaking of that film. The filmmaking of that is shocking.
No, it's not well filmed. It is not well filmed.
It's literally a home movie. But if you listen to it, it's fantastic.
Super. Shot mostly at a lovely stately home just outside Stratford-upon-Avon called Compton Verney. And that's where they filmed most of it. So up comes a shot at the beginning of it, of the house, and then the word appears on screen, Athens. It's lovely. I mean, that's a good gag. I'll take that. One of the things that happens with the movies is they have to continually reinvent how they're thinking about Shakespeare. And the really exciting films, and we've mentioned some of them already in this chat, the really exciting ones just have an energy that is coming out of the play and onto the screen in a way that is distinctively itself. And each one of those, the great films, they have their kind of unique quality to them. And one, for me, two of the greatest of all Shakespeare films are the two by the Russian director Grigory Kozintsev, a version of Hamlet and a version of King Lear, shot in a very widescreen format known as SovScope, Soviet scope. It wasn't allowed to be called Cinescope or Cinerama or anything like that. It was called SovScope. And there is a scale of vision in Kozintsev's filmmaking that for me is simply spectacular. And I don't just mean spectacular because there are a lot of people on screen, though it's that too, but because there is a quality of thoughtfulness that is part of that long tradition in Russia of caring about Shakespeare and thinking of Shakespeare as somehow belonging to them, just as German Shakespeareans often talk about unser Shakespeare. So there's that notion in Russia too. And I think Kozintsev, who had a long stage career first, is drawing on that. And he had film scores by Shostakovich, not shabby, if you can get Shostakovich to write your music. Shostakovich worked with him on film after film, not just the Shakespeare films, and knew exactly what he was after. And it's just beautiful. And there are moments that are just so moving. So in the King Lear film, I just want to describe one thing. The fool in it is a young boy, rather emaciated, and he plays a little flute recorder, like penny whistle kind of instrument. Kozintsev talked about him in the book he wrote about making the film as the Auschwitz boy. He looks like a survivor, so gaunt, so emaciated. And you know, Shakespeare kind of writes the fool out of the play halfway through and he just vanishes. At the very end of the film, as they're carrying off the coffins from the screen of Lear and all three of his daughters, the fool is on the side playing his flute. And one of the people carrying the coffins, he's slightly in the way and just kicks him away. And they don't know who he is. He's just some peasant playing a flute. But we know when we watch, we know who he is. And the way that all our memories of that role flood back at that moment, so understated, even in a grand epic production, that for me is very great filmmaking.
On the scale of filmed Hamlets, from sort of Branagh and Burton to Gibson and Hawke, where would you rank Arnold Schwarzenegger?
Oh, that's a wonderful performance. You killed my father. Big mistake. You know,
To be or not to be. Not to be.
Not to be. That for me is one of the gems. And you know, it includes a wonderful little gag in it. So the setup, this is from Last Action Hero. Yeah. This film-obsessed kid runs away from the movie theater when he should have been in school, gets into school, and his teacher is going to screen a bit of the Olivier Hamlet, and he watches it, and then and there's Olivier as Hamlet not killing Claudius's prayer, and the kid goes, "Just do it," and the thing metamorphoses into being Schwarzenegger as the kind of action hero version. The gag is that the teacher in that sequence is Joan Plowright, who was Olivier's widow. And
that's great.
If you know that, it's perfect. And she's saying, you know, this film stars a great actor, Laurence Olivier. You probably know him from some kind of terrible movie.
Like a commercial, wasn't it? Some sort of commercial that he'd done, I think it is.
He'd done the Polaroid commercials.
Polaroid commercial. That's what she mentions. Yeah, I think she said
but the fact that if you know her, that's who it is. It's another little Easter egg. I love these jokes. In-jokes are part of our lives, and we should cherish them.
And that joke speaks exactly to what so many people feel when they get to that point in the play. Almost all of us want to yell out, "Just do it!
Just do it! I've sat here for 3 hours. Would you now just come on? You know, I'm getting sore and numb from this." No, exactly. And actually, if you don't think that, something's wrong in the production. You should be thinking, just do it. Be Arnie. Go on, just don't even think about it. Just kill. You know, that's what movies can do.
Well, Peter, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your friendship and the help you've given me in the various books we've written, and also for helping to bring the workshop of William Shakespeare's long-lost first play, Abridged, to Notre Dame Shakespeare, where in addition to everything else, I got one of my most favorite T-shirts.
Isn't that wonderful? I'd known you were going to wear that one. I would have put on the same T-shirt, but I try not to do the kind of product placement.
You're a better man than I in so many ways.
Thanks, it's been fun.